Hello. So, good morning. I wanted to talk about. I've been doing some research for a researched part 2 on my Candace Owens video. Get some stats and context for her stats, particularly regarding like redlining and those kind of policies that mean that there is some form of or some shadow of systemic racism in which racist agents can then really get ahead and implement further racist policy and stuff. So that's going to happen soon. But I remembered that I had listened to one of Russell Brand's videos where he interviews her a little while ago, and I started listening to that just whilst I was doing some research, just so that I could understand her head again, because I've taken a lot of information from a lot of different places recently. So to be honest, I had to, refresh myself. And there are two things that I want to say on that, because she's not a through and through Republican. She doesn't neatly fit into old school Republicanism, right? Conservatism, Republicanism, whatever you want to call it, in America. Instead, I'm not entirely sure what she represents, but there's one point that I wanted to address right away, and only because it fits very neatly with something that I love talking about all the time. And I was just like, oh, I get to talk about John Ruskin. So that's what I'm going to do. Because there's a couple of things that she talks about as part of the capitalist system and part of like human nature. Yeah. So she talks about what is in human nature quite a lot. And one of the things that she says is the desire to create. And that is a key part of human fulfillment, which I completely agree with. Absolutely, 100%, right? My problem with what she's saying is that she's saying that humans have a natural desire to create and be a creator. And then she equates that to being a worker. And those aren't the same thing. And I'm going to reference John Ruskin here. He is a socialist person. He really informed a lot of the Labour Party's first policies when they came in the UK as a working class party, right? He wasn't working class, he was an aristocrat. And he believed in hierarchy still, which I personally don't, obviously. But one of the key things that he brought up, he followed Marx and Engels. And if you haven't read Marx and Engels, please don't talk to me about Marxism, because you actually don't know what you're talking about. So I'm just going to say that now. If your comments are to do with Marxism or anything like that, you best know what you're talking about. So, anyway, at the turn of industrialisation, one of the biggest problems that a large majority of people, whether workers or not, had was that people weren't going to be creators anymore. And the famous line from John Ruskin, which I think everyone should have to make themselves familiar with, is he was referring to factory workers and what he conceived factory work as. And he says, "You must either make a tool of the creature or a man of him. You cannot make both. Men were not intended to work with the accuracy of tools, to be precise and perfect in all their actions. If you will have that precision out of them, and make their fingers measure degrees like cogwheels and their arms strike curves like compasses, you must unhumanize them. All the energy of their spirits must be given to make cogs and compasses of themselves. All their attention and strength must go to the accomplishment of the mean act." He goes on, so here's later in the passage. "On the other hand, if you will make a man of the working creature, you cannot make a tool. Let him but begin to imagine, to think, to try, to do anything worth doing, and the engine-turned precision is lost at once. Out come all his roughness, all his dullness, all his incapability, shame upon shame, failure upon failure, pause after pause, but out comes the whole majesty of him also, and we know the height of it only when we see the clouds settling upon him." So, for Candace Owens and republicanism, and this newfound republicanism and conservatism, for them to talk about human desire to create and then equate that with being a worker under someone else, in the way that in bureaucratic systems that the majority of us are in, having no control over your own labour, how's that freeing in any way? I don't think that's in line with human nature, being a worker. And I think pretty much everyone knew that from the start of workers really becoming a thing. And, you know, piece labour and waged work and stuff like that. Like, you know, because within wage work, what you're doing is you're putting a value on someone's time. And let me tell you, minimum wage, my time is worth a lot more than £8 something. A lot more. Way more. Definitely if I've got to travel to wherever I've got to go to, that time is worth something too. And it's only wage workers whose time is not valued in that sense. It's very easy for someone like Candace Owens to say, you know, we should be free to create as humans. She gets paid to turn up and say stuff. She gets paid to travel. She gets paid to say stuff to blank faces. And she gets paid to leave and go back home. So it's very easy for her to say, we should be free to work because that's what our soul desires. Yeah, if you're doing what you actually want to do. And the problem with work, and particularly wage work, which is what she's professing as being fulfilling and helping you accomplish your purpose as a human, it's absolutely mad. If you're not doing what you love, and if you're doing something that literally turns you into a tool, how can you say that that's you accomplishing anything to do with your human purpose or being part of your human nature? It is not human nature to go and work a 12-hour shift packaging shit. It's not human nature to pretend that you enjoy talking to 100 people in an evening and taking their orders. None of that is human nature. We need to stop pretending it is. So anyway, that's what I think of that. And she's got it's the same here, and John Ruskin talks about this too. Maybe just go and get this book. I talk about it to everyone. On Art and Life. It's a compilation of just some of John Ruskin's thoughts, not only on social life, but also mainly, actually, on Gothic architecture and things like that. But it's a very interesting way of framing things. So, like, Gothic architecture is imperfect, but because of the personal care that goes into it with the architect normally takes on everything themselves. It takes much longer, it's a more laborious process, it's more expensive, and it ends up with a much less perfect product. But the product is 1,000 times better for that fact, because it's someone's soul and heart and soul has gone into that, and we don't get that anymore with most stuff that's created. So I just didn't like that. That being said, because most work is not fulfilling in the way that she presented it. And she must realise that. So again, I come back to the idea of willful misrepresentation, because she must be aware of that. She must be. I imagine if she had to pull herself up in the same way that I've had to, she knows that 0-hour contract, or maybe they don't have 0-hour contracts, maybe they do, I don't know. 0-hour contracts, minimum wage, insecurity, all of that, which is found in the majority of, wage work nowadays, and like work that most people rely on when they're in between stages in their lives, that sort of informal but formal work. She must realise none of that is fulfilling, and it actually hurts your soul. Like, actually does. You are dehumanized by being treated like that constantly. So how she can say that, I really don't know. But yeah, there seems to be quite a bit to do with the Protestant work ethic as well, that comes out in a lot of what she's talking about. And I personally think that comes back to Britain. I think that comes back to empire, colonialism, imperialism. And I find it fascinating that Americans have taken that on as part of American culture. That's hilarious. So I kind of faintly was aware of this, obviously, just from, not obviously, but particularly from, I think I might have mentioned him before, but Parsons, he's a sociologist. He's a functionalist sociologist, so he believes that everything in society has its purpose and plays a certain role and it all works together. I think that's a load of bull. But he did this piece, I think I've mentioned it before again, Full Citizenship for the American Negro, written in 1956, maybe. Oh, that could be wrong. Around then, though, 1950s, 1960s. Could be 1969, could it? Oh, I'm going to look it up just so that I'm absolutely make sure. But it's a brilliant analysis of all of the policies that were put in place after desegregation and Jim Crow laws. Like, he looks at a lot, and how the Constitution, this is the argument of his piece, is that the American Constitution supports the idea of any citizen. He particularly references the 13th, 14th and 15th Amendment, which most of you'll seem to forget exists all the time. I'm not do most of you know what's in the Constitution? Because it's actually a pretty good legal document. So anyway, in that he talks about individualism as a cornerstone of American ideals. However, and he does talk about Protestantism a little bit. 1965, that's when it was written, so I nearly got it right. Just the wrong way around. So that it's called Full Citizenship for the Negro American, a Sociological Problem. Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? There used to be a scientific journal called the Negro American, so that tells you where they were at that time of writing, I think. But yes, he talks a lot about American culture, and he does talk about Protestantism quite a lot. But it's interesting to me that Americans have taken that on as an American ideal, because that's British, that's English. Well, it's not British, it's English through and through. I mean, clearly, so that's interesting to me. This Protestant work ethic and Protestant family values are the cornerstone for conservatism here too. But yeah, that I don't so much have a problem with. I personally have a problem with any religious ideals being involved in any institution which claims or even aims to present themselves in any way secular. Again, which that's another issue for another time, as always. Religion within politics and government, I think, is another issue that should definitely be addressed. But yeah, that was a theme that seemed to be coming up quite a lot in Candace's discussion with Russell. I say discussion. She wasn't listening much. And oh, here's a nice little. No, I'll leave that for another day. Yeah, I just found that interesting because there's no way that you could call the majority of work that people do now fulfilling or in line with human purpose. So here I look back at Ruskin. It is not that men are ill-fed, but that they have no pleasure in the work by which they make their bread, and therefore look to wealth as the only means of pleasure. I think that's absolutely right. It is not that men are pained by the scorn of the upper classes, but they cannot endure their own, for they feel that the kind of labour to which they are condemned is verily a degrading one, and makes them less than men. That's what we're dealing with, really, in work, in the majority of work. Thanks to bureaucracy as well, it's even more so. So it's not just if you're in a factory anymore. It's majority of office work that doesn't need to be done. Call centre jobs. All of those kinds of services. Retail, hospitality, everything. And don't get me wrong, there are obviously organisations, people, companies within those sectors that aren't going to always be that. But let's be honest with ourselves, shall we? If you're a worker in Tim Hortons, let's describe what I saw yesterday. You have 3 workers behind the scenes in Tim Hortons and 1 on the till. Yeah, this is Fordisation of basic tasks, so that there are more jobs for everyone. That's what this is. It's the oversimplification so that there are more jobs to give out to people at lower wages, so you have more people employed, but at an awful rate and doing awful jobs that they get no fulfillment out of. And then you get mental health issues, and then that's a whole nother thing to look into. But let's look at that. Okay, so you've got 1 person on the tills. You've got 1 person in the back. They're cutting up muffins, right? So they're cutting up the muffins. And then they're occasionally refilling drawers with veggie sausage, egg, cheese slices and sausage slices, all in the drawers. And then the next lad, he's there, and he's taken out of the drawer some of the sausage, some of the cheese, some of the egg. He's finding a hash brown from over here. Or that might be the next person's, actually. I think it is. So he's just doing the thing. He does the thing. And then the person's over here on the coffee, pouring the coffee out, doing the coffee. And then the person on the till, gets all of that together. They get all of that. Each person puts their bit on the tray. And then the person at the till brings that over 1 metre somewhere else and calls a number. And the customer arrives and picks up their things. That's the over-mechanisation of a very simple process. that you could have had probably 2 workers doing overall. But now you've got 4 or 5 workers, depending on how busy it is, maybe even 6, depending on how busy it is, doing what 2 people could have done. Who? And I've worked in coffee shops. I've been a manager in a coffee shop, a duty manager, not manager. In a coffee shop. I've worked in retail. I've worked in a lot of different restaurants, all sorts. And it's not fun. You couldn't say that there's anything enjoyable about that. And yeah, so if Candace has pulled herself up and gone through, I'm assuming gone through that, I don't understand how she can say work in general is fulfilling for the human soul, because the majority of it just is not. I mean, I think the majority of people know that. I mean, yeah, it's interesting all of that. I could probably go into Fordisation, bureaucracy in terms of job creation and dulling the human soul. I could probably go into that quite a bit more, and I might go into Marxism, Engels, Ruskin. I probably will at some point go into those a little bit more, but just wanted to address that about Candace Owens and her core principle that work is fulfilling for humans.